Council to order on August 29th. Roll call, please.
Mayor Schlachter,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ryden,
I am present.
Councilmember Barr,
Here.
Councilmember Grove,
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll, Councilmember Milliman,
Here.
Councilmember Valdez.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Council had a chance to review any changes. Seeing none. I'm going to make one small change and let the city manager have a comment here. He just wanted to say something real quick before we move on to general business. So
Thanks, Mayor. Just two, actually, announcements. The first one is to clarify something the mayor raised. There's the location of tomorrow's Meet, Eat, and Greet, the final one of the year, is at Powers. Oh, sorry, geez, I just didn't.
no, it's not.
Promise Park, located, on
Do you
Promise
promise
Place.
that's accurate?
It's all in the delivery, huh? So, yes, it's at Promise Park. It has been advertised a little differently in different places, so we want to coordinate that. And we believe every place it's been advertised now has been corrected, but we appreciate the mayor's notice that there was the discrepancy. Finally, tonight, I just want to remind council and the public that tomorrow evening at 6:30 is the first community meeting for Project Downtown. In the interest of time, I won't go into a lot of the scope there, but it is the first opportunity for the public and anyone else interested to participate, see what that project's about, learn more about timeline and the many opportunities that are on the horizon here for both in-person and virtual participation in that planning. So you can find out more about it on the city's event calendar. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. As this is a special meeting, we do not have council comments or reports or public comment period, so we'll move straight into our general business item. We have one item on general business. It's ID 23-219. Tabor ballot question for November 7th, 2023. So I'm going to turn this over to the city manager and introduce this topic.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. As council's aware, we have had our Measure 3A sales tax revenue measure in place now since November of 2021. And so we have about a year and a half of the revenue collected there. We've been collecting revenue, using it for the purposes approved by the voters. But this last week, I was made aware, we were made aware that we have some action to take for the city to remain in compliance with the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights provision of the Colorado State Constitution. So we want to talk that over with you tonight. And, I think my high-level overview is that Tabor requires some estimates to be made, and the city made those estimates during COVID. Even though we thought they were safe at the time, our local economy has overperformed as it relates to those estimates. So now we have some action to take to stay in compliance, and I will turn it over at this time to Tiffany, and I know she and Reed have been working really intensely over the last week to kind of make sense of the city's obligations and opportunities, and we want to outline that for you tonight. We're not seeking action tonight. We are seeking to just provide this overview. Reed will probably explain in a few minutes why this measure, as different from some other Tabor-related ballot measures, can be placed on the ballot by resolution as opposed to ordinance. So we have enough time for the actions that we need to take, and we just want to acquaint you with that tonight and then take your direction and follow through as you wish next week. I'll turn over to Tiffany.
Good evening, Council. Tiffany Hooten, Finance Director. This evening, we do have a general business item that we would like to talk with you about, and it's related to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and a ballot question, potential ballot question related to that as well. Here in Littleton, we have a lot of history on Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We are probably one of the few cities who is not fully de-Bruced in the sense that others might be. However, I do want to mention that this issue that we're discussing tonight is a little different than previous discussions on Tabor. So I do just want to point that out, and I'll explain the differences. Overall, Taxpayer Bill of Rights restricts revenues that state and local governments can collect. There's several Tabor restrictions. One is being related specifically to ballot questions, and this is the one that's related to the 3A ballot question that was passed in November of 2021. I did mention this is different. It's a different section of Tabor and a different requirement that we're required to follow. In past, we have exceeded our cap, a Tabor cap, and that is why in the past we have discussed refunds, or we have asked the voters to retain those funds for specific purposes. This is a different section of Tabor and has a different result, and it's specifically related to the 3A ballot question. So our challenge that we have for us this evening is we were required to provide two estimates related to the ballot question in 3A. One is, what are we estimating we're going to collect in the first year of that new tax that was passed by the voters? And second, we have to provide an estimated fiscal year spending, which is defined by Tabor, for the first year of that collection. Fiscal year spending can be complicated, but in essence, it essentially is revenues that the city receives, because you get those revenues in order to spend those funds. And so when we do an annual Tabor calculation, it's really based on your revenues. So sales tax revenues, use tax, open space revenues, a number of other revenues go into this calculation. In 2022, we exceeded both of these estimates, and that is clearly as a result of how quickly our economy came back from COVID. These estimates were made in approximately September or August of 2021. We were right in the midst of COVID, and the horizon and economy was in a very bad place at that time. We were being given our good faith estimate on what we thought those revenues would be, and those revenues did come back very quickly, much more quickly than anyone ever anticipated, which is ultimately why we did exceed these caps. We did exceed both caps, one related to the Measure 3A money that we received. We were about 1.14 million higher than we anticipated. And then our override citywide fiscal year spending was over by about 4.8 million. And so in total, according to TABOR regulations, we are required to take action on that total overage of about 5.97 million. And that is why we are here this evening. I already kind of mentioned this, but some main contributing factors definitely was our city sales and use tax revenues. We did come in much higher in 2022 than we ever anticipated. We started seeing this probably in about the second quarter of 2022, and then it just dramatically increased from that point forward. Some other items that we did not anticipate in 2022 that definitely have an impact on our TABOR calculation or our fiscal year spending calculation is any unanticipated influxes into our total revenues. So the stadium district funds. We were not aware that we were going to be receiving $1.2 million, and this is a revenue to the city, and it is not exempt from TABOR calculation. And so that posed an increase in our fiscal year spending in 2022. What are some of our options? The options are very similar to some of the previous TABOR refunds or ballot questions that we've had. One option is to refund to our taxpayers. We would be required to refund $5.97 million by the end of 2023. That is December 31, 2023. And then we would also be required to reduce the sales and use tax that has previously been established at 3.75 to approximately 3.33% in subsequent years. This is something that is included in the TABOR section and a requirement of the ballot passing. Another option we have is to appeal to the voters to allow the city to keep the collected revenues and the current tax rate of 3.75 so that we're able to continue with our planned capital projects related to the 0.75% increase. I just want to remind you of some of those projects that we have planned going forward. We have some major street maintenance and reconstruction in neighborhoods. You're already seeing that out there. Significant corridors, Santa Fe and Mineral, huge federal grant related items related to Santa Fe and Mineral. Downtown streetscape and parking. We have a downtown streetscape plan that we are working on so that we can revitalize downtown, and that's part of the planned expenditures in the future. We have public works facility replacement and upgrades to that entire facility area. We have a number of improvements and maintenance items that we would like to address at the museum, the library, the courthouse, and many other buildings throughout the city. A number of public safety facility improvements. Enhanced environmental stewardship improvements such as sustainable landscape irrigation and conservation improvements. These are just a number of the items that we have planned with 3A money both in 2023 and going forward. Refund and reduce option. This could be devastating to important planned capital project. I named a number of those. If the city does not seek voter approval, we'll be required to refund $5.9 million by the end of 2023. We would have to reduce our sales and use tax from 3.75 to 3.33. We would also likely be looking at a refund of some sort or method in 2023 as well. We're looking at our TABOR or our planned fiscal year spending in 2023, and there's a potential that this could impact that year as well. I already named some of the projects that this could potentially impact. We have a lot of bike and pedestrian improvements that we're working on. I can't emphasize Santa Fe and Mineral any more than I probably already have. We have a huge federal grant that is related to that intersection. This could jeopardize that federal grant. Platte Canyon Road improvements, County Line Road improvements, key facility maintenance and replacement, which was the intention of the 3A measure to help us get some of those planned and backlogged infrastructure improvements that we haven't been able to get to. Staff recommendation. Staff does recommend that we put a measure on the November 7th ballot to retain the revenues and maintain the existing tax rate per the Tabor requirements.
Tiffany, I'd like to just comment before staff concludes. I want to address the timing of this, of the decision. I know I've been informed that when we've had to address Tabor and make these kinds of decisions in the past, those decisions have come to council in the July and early August timeframe, as opposed to very late August when we have ballot certification pending at this time. And I understand that we also have been contemplating, and we're talking tonight about the potential increase in the sales tax on marijuana. I just want to, say to council, we understand this came up very late, and I just want to, say to council, I'm responsible for that timing. I'm responsible for all of our operations, and I regret that we've kind of put you in this position tonight, so late in August, given what we have to do. I know Tiffany has assured me that the accounting procedures have been updated to make sure that when we have new taxes, which 3A was the first in decades, that this kind of check is part of that process. But I just want to let council know that we acknowledge this, and I apologize for kind of the spot that you're in tonight. So with that, Mayor, that concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and hear your direction.
Does council have any questions? Councilmember Driscoll.
Tiffany, what would that equate to per registered voter, I guess, the refund? 5.9 million divided by what? 48 million, or 48,000, or is it, that's household? So is it just the, I
Well,
talked to you about this earlier.
yeah. So if you look at the number of registered voters, and let me just preface this, there are many ways that you could look at a refund method. We've looked at a number over the years. I think ensuring that it's something that is administratively easier is probably a better way to look at some of the refunds. But to your point, or to your question, let's say we had 38,000 voters, and we have to refund about 5.97 million. You're probably looking at about $150 per voter at those numbers.
And city clerk, to do that refund, how much would that cost? Are you guessing? I mean, to do a refund, when we do go to a mailer, we're typically around $25,000 to do a mailer, so.
Right, and in looking back in 2006, when the city did the only, what I'm going to call a paper refund, I want to say the costs back then were upwards of over $140,000. When you take into account staff time, you had to get information from the counties, you had to vet the data, you had to review it, you had to ensure you had a policy for dealing with those who didn't return them or they got returned by mail, working with the...
Did we have computers back then?
We barely, but yes, we did.
I would think it'd be a lot cheaper than that.
There's a potential of outsourcing or finding we have resources that we could look at, but I mean, I would say it would probably be upwards of at least $100,000 in total if you look at it. And then the future impact of lost checks, return checks, if you were to do those methods.
I was just gonna say, would that come out of the Tabor refund, or that is an additional $100,000 expense?
It's additional. You cannot remove it from a Tabor refund calc.
And then just one last thought, what are fail-safes we're putting in place so we don't, I mean, is this something we're gonna have to deal with every year, or are you adjusting our estimates, or what's our game plan?
Yeah, so every year we do a fiscal year spending, a Tabor calc, what I call a Tabor calc. This just happens to be related to the ballot question. So anytime going forward, if we have a ballot question that's related to a bond or to a tax increase, then we would need to watch this. And we have put practices in place that we are already aware of where we are this year in relation to our most recent sales tax that was increased. So we are.
So can we increase that from 9.5 up to 11 million next year? Can you do that, or no?
I don't know the answer to that.
I think
Increase
if we
what
can
now?
answer the question, as it pertains to Measure 3A, Tabor this requirement is for the first full year of revenue collection, so 2022. That's the year that we're focused on. But to the broader point, I know Tiffany is going to be keenly aware as we move in, as we finish the first full year of our new lodgers tax, for instance. That first year, since that was passed in 2022, the first full year is 2023. So as we close the books on 2023, we will be coming back to council sooner in the year with kind of that final calculation. And again, in likely that July timeframe, once everything's finished. And we'll know if we are, clearly compliant, or if we'll have to have some similar decision around the lodgers tax.
So, and to add to that, I would say one of the challenges with this specific 3A tax is it was a general sales tax. It's hard to kind of pump the brakes on sales tax. With a lodgers tax or a proposed marijuana tax, as we get close to kind of those revenue projections, if we did, there is the ability for the city to stop collecting on those taxes, so that we don't run into an issue where we're exceeding the Tabor cap in this particular case, or the estimated total revenue.
Council, any other questions? Councilmember Milliman.
Hi, thanks Tiffany for that presentation. I have two questions. One about debrucing. I want to hear a little bit more about that. I don't really understand that. And then two, with the, if we had to refund that almost $6 million and our sales and use tax had to drop down to 3.33, could you explain why that would have to drop, and how long would it last? Given that our voters, there was very, very strong support in passing the 3A sales tax increase. Okay, thanks.
Nose goes.
I'll go ahead and address the debrucing. So a debrucing, in effect, would not help in this situation because it's a different section of Tabor and a different purpose.
Maybe explain who Bruce is,
I'm sorry?
who Bruce is.
Oh, why is his
So,
name escaping me right
Douglas-
now?
I
Douglas
just-
Bruce.
I just learned this today. so.
Sorry.
Douglas Bruce is a lawmaker out of Colorado Springs who developed some constitutional amendments to address
He's a convicted felon now.
He was, sorry. A lawmaker out of Colorado Springs who developed some constitutional ballot language in an effort to provide a better check or control on government spending in that case, as well as government revenues. When we refer to the term debrucing, it is a tip of the hat to Douglas Bruce, that author. And debrucing is what most counties and cities in the state of Colorado have done. And what that does is it removes that cap the city of Littleton had to address, a decade or so ago, which is that total revenue cap. In those particular instances, counties and local jurisdictions have brought measures to their constituents asking whether or not, we could forego the constraints of total revenue. And so I would say 51 out of 64 counties have already done that. 230 out of 274 cities and municipalities have already done that. In this particular case, we weren't concerned with the total revenue. Total revenue cap has been high due to, in part, the fire district going off on its own. And so there's kind of a scale that ratchets up every year in terms of the amount of money that's projected. So we're underneath that. So there's two different Tabor questions. So for this particular Tabor question that we're speaking to tonight, it deals with a very specific section of the code that relates to that first year of tax collection when you have a new tax or if you've changed that tax to a higher rate. So that's what we're dealing with today.
Thank you. And then, so can you talk a little bit about the potential new sales and use tax percentage if we had to refund the money?
Right. So, and I'll let Tiffany jump in, but what the Tabor section requires you to do is basically, if you're over on your estimates, on your good faith estimates, and it's important to mention that we're required to make a good faith estimate. We can't just make any number that we want. It's a good faith estimate based upon solid principles in accounting and whatever they do with their abacus over there. So what the Tabor language says within the state constitution is if you're over on those estimates, then you have to reduce the tax rate by what you were over. And so in this particular case, when Tiffany has gone through the math on this, it requires a reduction in kind of our effective sales tax rate to 3.33%. And that will continue forever until the voters allow for this increase for the city to retain that excess revenue in this case. So 2024, 3.33.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be this excess revenue, but we have to go back with a specific amount asked to raise it to, whether it's less or more than, or equal to what is being reduced by.
Say that one more time.
It depends on the measure that we had put before the voters to see, ask them to increase it to something.
Correct, but if we went back to the voters and allowed for them, and if the voters voted to allow us to retain the excess revenue, that would pop it back up to 3.75,
Right.
which has already been
But
approved.
it's at 3.75 now. If they don't,
Correct,
then it would
correct.
lower. Right, that's what she's asking. If it
I'm sorry.
lowers, when can it go back up? Not till voters say it can go back up to.
That's correct.
Councilmember Valdez?
So with the additional 3A revenue that has been received, so Tabor's in effect here for 2023 regarding 3A. So for 2024, the additional revenue that's still being brought in by 3A, do we or do we not have to go out again? So I see the city clerk shaking her head, no. So we would not have to go in based on our estimates, what we think things are going to be. We would not have to go in. So this is like a one-time thing for 3A, is that correct?
Yeah, what's triggering this is only that initial year underestimate, if you will. So we were only concerned about 2022. We don't care what 2023 comes into play, other than the fact that if we have to reduce our tax rate to the effective 3.3%, then we're looking at a refund for 2023.
So the same thing will be applicable, I think, as you had just mentioned a little bit ago with the hotel tax. We're going to have additional revenue, but as we watch the revenue, knowing what we need to do, we can stop collecting that revenue at some point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then we would not have to be concerned about whether or not we have to go out
If it was necessary, yeah.
if it was necessary. I mean, based on the estimates that we're doing throughout the year.
That is correct. It's a lot easier to control, 4 or 5 retailers remitting, or, properties remitting to us than it is, 20,000 businesses within the city.
And Tabor it has been good for a lot of cities, and as Colorado's politics have changed, that Tabor has gone away. I think it's great that Littleton still has it, because it really helps keep us in check to make sure we're doing things. And it does cost to go out to an election, but the citizens know that. So, anyway, cool, thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem has a question.
The $100,000 that it might cost to run this refund, so if it can't come out of Tabor money, so would it come out of the general fund?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
That's where we would recommend.
Questions, comments? When I legislate died, my questions disappeared. So I'll just go with what I have in my memory here.
Well, this ought to be good.
Yeah, this ought to be good. So, I understand the overage on the 3A tax of how that goes over. We collected more than we expected. That makes sense. The fiscal year spending estimate is, loosely connected to that. I mean, it seems this is more just straight punitive than tied to estimating what the tax was going to bring in. Can you explain why the whole spending authority, fiscal year spending? Because let's say we didn't have a 3A tax and we spent a few $1 million more than we had set in our initial budget there. Would we have still do a refund there?
We would not, and the reason is because we didn't state in the ballot question or the blue book what we anticipated our fiscal year spending to be. We do an annual cap calculation, and we were well below the cap that we do annually.
So that portion of it is not, we're not being penalized for having those additional overall revenues, but just because this one small portion of our overall revenue, 3A fund, exceeded it, then that triggered an additional punitive damage, basically. Is that how I could understand that?
Yeah, I'm happy to opine that, and going through and talking with outside counsel who looks at a lot of these Tabor issues, I mean, that was kind of the takeaway, that it is largely punitive to ensure that governments aren't underestimating on the revenue that they're collecting. And so I think that was the intent. One of the intents behind Tabor, I don't know if it has worked that way in practice from what cities have seen. And I also think it's important to note that we're not the only city that's having to face this. A lot of other cities in the Denver metro area have undergone the same sort of going back to the voters. I can tell you, coming up this fall, the state will be doing the exact same thing as it relates to the tobacco tax that was raised. In that case, they underestimated how much revenue they were going to bring in, or a lot of people started smoking. And so that will be on your ballot in November. The same thing to either increase the monies to retain those excess monies collected, or to refund that and then have to reduce what the special cigarette tax is, so.
And then the distinction between the two buckets of money, I'll just call them right now. I understand the ease at which the 3A fund can, the expected revenue can be exceeded, because that's, we don't control the revenue. If the economy's going good, more is going to come in. So that's, understandable. The spending, the fiscal year spending that we exceeded is a little more concerning, because we put it in there and, we knew that we had this Tabor issue there. I mean, that's something we could have controlled. We could have not spent some of those. I find it also hard how the spending plan counts the stadium district funds as spending when we didn't spend a dime of it that year. And so it was brought in as revenue and not actually spending. So I guess that's kind of two questions. I mean, how did we not see our budget throughout the year that we were spending more than we said we were going to? And then why does revenue count as spending? I know accountants like to turn things upside down when it comes to that, but.
I would say it's the language and the definition that's in Tabor that requires us to calculate the revenue, because it's essentially what you have collected because you intend to spend it in the future. And so it's a fiscal year spending.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I would say that's pretty poorly worded on Tabor's behalf there.
Agree with it at all, but that's how it's defined.
Yeah.
And does the fiscal year spending plan account for, because I know it's what you expect without the tax increase. Let's say we have that in there, we get the tax increase and we use those funds and spend it. Does that count as, let's say we come right up under the 3A cap, and then we add those funds to that fiscal year and increase our fiscal spending that year, would we be in violation of the spending year plan just because we added a new tax and spent it that year?
I'm trying to understand. I don't think we would.
Okay.
In the regard that you're referring to.
Okay. All right, let's see if anyone else has any questions, anything else spurred. Councilmember Valdez.
Not really a question. Now, I know that the governor has often tried, instead of calling something a tax, a fee. Why don't we just call it a fee that we're receiving for the Bronco tax? It's a fee for, us providing certain stuff through RTD that now they sold, so now we're getting a fee. Let's just do that.
I'm hearing a rhetorical question, Councilmember.
I'll hang up.
Mayor? May I make
Yeah,
one
City Manager.
comment too? Just to clarify, in case anyone watching is also wondering, the recommendation is to place this on the November 7th ballot. So there would be no additional cost for us to have this election. It would not be a special election. This would be added to our costs that we're already planning to have as part of the coordinated election with Arapahoe County.
And just so all council's clear and
The other
the
counties as well.
thousands of people watching online are also clear, So the alternative is if we don't put a question on the ballot asking to retain this, we then would have to refund the money in the next, 3 months, or however much left in the, 3
4
months, I guess,
months.
are left in the.
By the end of the year, if you did not refund by the end of the year, you would face a 10% penalty.
And yes, there's an additional 10% penalty if we waited till January 2nd to do it.
And we've tentatively planned probably your second study session in September, where we would bring back some of those scenarios and methods by which we can have that contingency plan, assuming council places this on the ballot. We would want to have that plan and direction from council on how to do that. So we would come back with specifics on, and options on how that could be done.
Okay. Anything else, Councilmember Grove?
I wanted to clarify one thing, Tiffany, about the debrucing. Even if we had a debrucing whatever, this would still require us to do this because it's a separate section.
Yes.
That's what okay, I just wanted to.
That's very, very specific to new tax increases and that first year estimate. That is, and I guess that spurs me. So how much experience does the city have with this? Is this something that's commonplace that we should be used to?
We have zero experience in this area because we have not had a tax increase in over 50 years taxes have come to fruition. So we have zero experience in it.
We still should have been paying attention to it, but this is kind of like a Tabor gotcha question that, when it's something you're not really used to and very minutiae, very specific to something there. So, yeah, this is, I'm glad we caught it, but, this is tough to deal with, so I think, do you want just direction, council, okay with getting this on to our next meeting here to have it as a resolution to get this, get it on the ballot here? All right, great, thank you. And then let's see here, we are on ordinances on second reading and public hearings. We have one tonight, we have ordinance 16 of 2023. Ordinance on second reading submitted to the registered electors of the city of Littleton, Colorado, a ballot issue regarding a proposed additional increase of 3.5% tax on the retail sale of marijuana and marijuana products. As people might remember, we postponed this from last week to this week so we could have a little more understanding of the previous item of discussion, so we have a full understanding of how our ballot might look in this fall. So I'll turn it over to the city manager and introduce this once again.
Thank you, Mayor. As you just said, we thought it was important that council have these presentations and these items contemporaneously so that you can bring your thoughts on kind of how they would work in combination potentially with each other. Our intent tonight, since this is a second reading of the ordinance, is to have a very brief presentation. Council has seen this information more than once that you'll be seeing tonight. At the end of the presentation, we'll be seeking council's direction on whether to place this marijuana sales tax rate increase on the ballot. One question that was not answered in your packet that I know is very important is what would we do if with the services proposed, should council decide to defer this, not place it on the ballot. So after the slides we have, I can address that, and then we'll seek council's decision on this on second reading. Kathleen?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. So this information will look pretty familiar. This again was the direction from council to advance the marijuana sales tax rate increase. We did do a scan of comparable tax rates and found that a 3.5% increase still kept us competitive with our most neighboring jurisdictions and others in the region. And so that was the suggestion as we went through the research and had that conversation. Again, the purpose of this tax rate increase would really be focused on public safety and proactive services that include mental health crisis response, as well as other proactive safety programs here in the city. So it would be restricted to that purpose. There was industry outreach that was conducted and working with our economic development team and those in the industry, and we continue that outreach and conversation with industry as well. So the cost for services, when we looked at those proactive services, we did find that within the budget, $413,000 the cost, and that 3.5% sales tax would cover those costs of the proactive safety programs. We have modified the staff recommendation from your last packet, and I'll turn it over to City Manager Becklenberg.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, you'll see that we are urging caution tonight. Council, totally your discretion on these sorts of matters as they pertain to public support for ballot measures. But given the importance, the really fundamental importance to the plans that we have going forward for our capital plans, we are urging caution and simplicity for the November 7th ballot, and we would recommend that we would defer this ballot measure at this time, come back to it sometime in the future when council thinks it might be right again. Could you go back to the slide with the services on it and the costs? Thank you. So if council does decide to defer on this for now and not place it on the ballot, we understand, and I also believe and support the high priority for the expanded mental health services and these downtown and trail presences and the cooperation we can have between our law enforcement and mental health professionals. That's really high priority for us in this year's budget and overall plan. If council were to not place this measure on the ballot, we would plan to come back to council in the recommended budget. We would go back to the police department and essentially reprioritize those proactive services that they've talked about that range from reinforcing patrol and neighborhood connections to the traffic unit, reinforcing dispatch that needs to happen as part of a very much larger package that we've been talking about. But I would certainly plan to come back to you with a recommended budget that includes most of these costs, at least the co-responder and case manager costs. The chief may have a thought on whether we could, the pros and cons of one of the officers dedicated here. There would be some other trade-offs that would come back in that proactive police package. So we would plan to prioritize these services, though, in your budget, with the plan that it will just take longer over time to, be able to program some of those other things that we've been anticipating. So that's our presentation, and we're glad to answer any
Great.
questions.
Council, any questions? Councilmember Driscoll.
No. I have a statement.
Well, let's hold off. We got to
Okay.
have questions here, and then we'll have a public comment period for statements and whatnot. We can do that after there's a motion in a second. You have a question, Councilmember Valdez?
Thank you, Mayor. For alcohol sales, whether it's a grocery store or a liquor store, what is the tax for that? Is it the same, a regular sales tax? Is it a special tax? What is that tax?
It's a regular sales tax.
It's a regular sales tax. So is there of course, I guess I know my answer.
That's the reason for the huge increase.
Really, exactly. Yeah, really, that's where all the retail sales tax came in from the liquor stores. So we're in this case, we're just kind of focused on, say, the marijuana sales, but why would we not want to include alcohol as well? That's a question. It seems to me that it's when I read this, it's made it sound as though it's just all kind of because of marijuana we were doing this. Why would we not want to, and I don't think that's the case, but why would we not want to have something for alcohol? Is that possible?
I would say to answer, maybe hopefully try to answer your question, Councilmember Valdez, it's because within Amendment 64, there was a specific provision in there that you could treat marijuana differently, that local jurisdictions had an opportunity to tax that specific good or commodity at a different rate than others. And we may not have the ability to do that for alcohol or some other related sale.
But we have a grocery tax. Not everybody has a grocery tax, but Littleton has.
We do not have a grocery tax.
No, I'm sorry, we chose not to have the grocery
We-
tax. Some have grocery tax. Some items, when you go to a grocery store, are taxed.
It was
So
a
we
s-
do pick and choose.
So it was a specific tax on goods, groceries. It was still the exact same sales tax. We decided not to tax groceries. So it wasn't a special tax on groceries. It was just regular sales tax that we decided to go away from in terms of consumable.
So if we were to do alcohol, then it would take something like with the marijuana tax, it'd have to be a special thing that we're adding to read.
Yeah, I think we would
Patrick,
have-
it would be an act of Congress, but we could do it, but it would have to go to the voters, of course, and say, hey, besides marijuana, we would also want to increase, have a tax on alcohol.
I would have to, I would think the answer would be no, because we haven't been, there's nothing set forth within state statute or in the state constitution that affords us the ability to tax that specific good differently than other goods such as that. Whereas in marijuana, there is specifically called out that local jurisdictions can impose their own tax in excess of what the state is charging.
So everything that is sold in the state that is allowed to be taxed is a sales tax, and nothing has a special tax like a use tax, say.
There's probably a few different special taxes, if you will. We can talk about cigarettes are one thing in which the state has promulgated a special tax. There's a gasoline tax. There are things like that. Those types of commodities or goods
Automobiles.
that our state or federal government has recognized as being different or causing some sort of effects that require them to be taxed at a different rate than regular goods.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, that in automobiles, I was thinking is another one, but we could have a special tax just for the sale of alcohol in Littleton, and there's a lot more alcohol sold, I would think, than marijuana.
I think the city attorney has said we could not. I mean, this is,
I don't believe we could do that. I can certainly research that and see if there are other types of goods such as alcohol, or if anyone else has tried to do that. I'm thinking because there is not anything within our state statute or state constitution that allows a local jurisdiction to tax that at a higher rate than other goods, that we would be prohibited in doing that. But I would need to research that further, Councilmember Valdez.
Cool. And the other one is a question for later.
great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Barr.
Yeah, and City Manager, appreciate your explanation as to how some of the potential opportunities that were going to be funded out of this this proposed tax could essentially be absorbed by the general fund. So thank you for your consideration in those options, because I think those things do reflect desires by our residents, our citizens, and folks that are reaching out to us. I want to ask a quick question, and you may not have a specific example or be able to cite a specific example, but I think for the benefit of the public, we're seeing, we have staff has put in some great work, done a lot of research alongside the retail and medical marijuana communities to come up with this proposed plan, and we're putting it to the side, hopefully for deferment at a later time. But we're doing so because there is a more important fiscal question on that ballot. And I think what was surprising to me after discussions with staff was that the likelihood of both measures passing is significantly lower if we were to have put both questions on the ballot. And I'm wondering if you could actually respond, explain, or even provide an example of where this may have occurred in the past.
Yes, Councilmember, I have to say, I don't remember asserting that it definitely would.
Sure.
I think we are generally aware of voter sensitivity to revenue measures, and we think it's likely that there could be a stronger reaction to the Tabor question if there's more than one question related to taxes on the ballot. That's purely, and I really want to be clear, that's our kind of public support speculation. I don't have any data to back that up. I'll look to Kathleen for a nod if you do have research, and I know Reed has something to say.
Yeah, no, absent polling data and just having the resident and business survey to guide us, which is where we had talked with the community about a potential increase in retail sales tax for marijuana. That's really the only indication that we have of that support. And so blending that together with this issue, really don't have that type of research.
We didn't do any polling on the marijuana question.
did not do any
To ask them,
polling,
would you
so-
support this and a Tabor refund question as well?
Right.
Kind of
Yeah, and I will say, you know, the other piece of that polling might have taught us a little bit about where the sensitivities are, and that's just something that we don't have absent that polling, so.
And that's okay. You know, I was not necessarily I didn't necessarily need an exact response or example set, but rather just to let the public know that this is based on staff's experience. And I think, you know, this council's intuition as to the likelihood of both and or either of these measures passing. So thank you for the clarification.
And so, you know, I guess I would further add that when we have done polling in the past and used a consultant, I mean, that was the advice that we always received in regard to, you know, I don't have the empirical data to support, you know, that it drops a measure down by 2 or 3%, but it is a significant amount to potentially make a difference when we have a large segment of our community that, in any community, that's just going to vote no when they see anything, regardless of what it says. Do you like puppies? No. You know, 45% hate puppies, apparently. And that's one of the reasonings that this, you know, when we brought 3A in front of City Council, we had also entertained and done some polling on lodger's tax, I think, at that time, as well as marijuana, and those all polled really well. But 3A was so important to the future of the city of Littleton and rebuilding a lot of the stuff that had been in deferment, that the decision that council made was, okay, we're just going to skip that. We're going to go with 3A. That's the most important one. Same one with lodger's tax last year. You know, there was polling to support that marijuana, maybe we didn't do polling last year for marijuana, but, you know, it's always polled pretty high in terms of a marijuana tax, no pun intended, a marijuana tax. But in that particular case, for the same sort of reasoning, it was, you know, do we want two tax measures? Do we want lodgers and marijuana tax on the same? And council decided, you know, lodgers tax is going to get us some of our priorities addressed right then. And so council elected to go with that as opposed to both, even though that one had been polling really well. And in this particular case, we're faced with a similar question. Now, it's not exactly a tax question, but there is a thought that if voters take a look at it, it's a bunch of tax information, it's numbers. And there may be a likelihood for some voters to be swayed by that and just vote no.
I would say I hope the city attorney sticks with his legal career and does not go into political polling or comedy. But any other questions? Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Wrighton?
Did you have a follow-up? No. Okay. Could you talk a little bit about the optics of having these two together? And I think that's what we've kind of been talking about, but maybe more specifically, like if you have a Tabor that says, hey, we underestimated what we took in, and then the marijuana tax, right, saying, hey, we want more money. Can you talk a little bit about just that messaging and what concerns, if any, there might be?
You know, Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know that I can speak to that concern. I hadn't thought of that, actually. But it sounds like you have, you know, there's a lot of, I think, thought about public support in the question that you asked. I don't have an answer to that question. Whether it speaks to our estimation of a revenue or not.
You know, I would say kind of in a general.
Mike?
I would say kind of in a general, to agree with, you know, what you're stating is that on one hand, it looks as if we're saying, hey, we have too much money, do you want it back? And on the other hand, it's saying, we need more money because we need this. And so it is kind of, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Councilmember Veld, are you done? Yeah. Councilmember Valdez?
So I think follow up on Councilmember Barr's, that we would be concerned about having more than one item on a ballot for a tax increase or a new tax. Is that correct?
We would be, yes.
Yeah,
Staff
and
would be.
I think for good reason. And I think that's only made possible because of Tabor. Because otherwise, without Tabor, citizens wouldn't have an opportunity to vote whether they would like a new tax or a tax increase. Correct? Yeah, because otherwise we'd have to call it a fee. So I think that's one of the benefits of Tabor right there.
Councilmember Milliman?
Regulatory adjustments, say we decided not to put this on the ballot. Can we speak to that a little bit? Adjusting hours, square footage of locations, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I believe a representative of one of our local retailers brought up some potentials in lieu of a higher tax would be expanding store hours for some of the 3 retailers that are within the city limits, expanding the building footprint from the current 2,500 square feet. There is the ability to potentially add more locations and to for council to consider maybe reducing some of those buffer zones to afford more opportunities for those retailers to be in existence within our city. The expanded store hours as mentioned, so there is the ability from an administrative side that doesn't need to go to the voters because the voters already approved retail sales that council could make if they wanted to presumably increase revenues that are generated from retail marijuana sales.
And would that be a vote by ordinance?
That would be an ordinance. We would have to change our existing ordinance, so we would have a public hearing. And that can be done at any time by city council, provided first and second reading.
And if we did 1 or 3 of those or 4 of those things, and we see an increase in revenues where we don't have to go back to the voters, maybe in the future for a tax increase, is that kind of a bonus too?
I think that would certainly be an opportunity, and I think it's for the city council at that time to evaluate the revenue that's come in, services we can afford, and any other needs in the city at that time.
Yeah, that's more of an economic development question than a tax question, is generated a tax base there. Anybody else have any other questions? I have a question, kind of going against something Councilmember Barr said, and I'm gonna sound like Councilmember Valdez here. I don't know. I don't feel about saying this.
You're learning.
But I know Councilmember Barr said the some of the costs associated with the co-responder program and the police proactive activities there could be absorbed into the general fund. That I kind of push back that because if it could be absorbed in the general fund, why don't we just do that and not ask for a tax increase? I know you had mentioned that there would be some trade-offs. There would be. So this is not just saying, oh, we can still make do with it. We're fine, or are we? If we are, then that's probably a problem. If we're not, we need to. What are the? You probably don't have the specific instances of where we are deprioritizing if we're prioritizing these things.
Thank you, Mayor, for asking that question, because I heard the same term. So yes, of course there would be compromises. The police chief and we have recommended a fairly comprehensive, proactive, policing program that we've outlined in other study sessions, things that would, reinforce patrol, that would enable more officer contact with neighborhoods, more communication about things going on, designated contacts in the police department for neighborhoods to have that dialogue ongoing. Also additional traffic enforcement in the area of school and construction zones. We hear a lot of, and you hear a lot of requests for that, and so that would help us to get to where we could really cover those areas. That's another proactive program. I think there were also part of that program, and if we were to kind of enhance the whole level of our proactivity for the police department, the chief has said we will, need to enhance our dispatching capacity too. They're kind of at the edge of what they're doing, and that there are a couple other spots that would come forward as part of that package. If we don't place this measure on the ballot, we're going to go back and come to you with a recommendation that excludes some of those things for 2024 and says we can't increase patrol as we would like to. We probably can't increase our traffic enforcement this year because we are prioritizing those mental health capacity expansion functions that are outlined as part of this presentation. So we would, have to sacrifice some of those plans that we currently have for 2024 in order to accommodate what could have been approved for use with the marijuana sales tax increase. Does that help, Mayor?
It does, but there would have to be other things that we are also deprioritizing. If we're able to do some of these things with the limited funds that we had, if we're being either more efficient or taking funds away from elsewhere. So it's not just oh yeah, we can make do with it. We can
Yeah,
shuffle
we won't
funds
have those
around, but we're gonna be not doing
We
something
won't
that
have
would
those services.
otherwise would be doing.
Right. We won't be able to offer some of those services that we've talked about in terms of kind of shifting our public safety posture out in the community.
Which kind of gets to my second point of that, yeah, here we go. While I really think, I mean, personally, Tabor is terrible policy. There are good points to it. There are some good points to it, but the fact that it's got this it's presenting this false sense of excess that the city has, and that we say, oh, we have $5.9 million that we don't really need, we can just give it back, which is not a true statement. We need those funds, we can use them. We're really taking away from services that we provide. And this saying, we have another tax question that we could provide even more services that would really benefit the community. And so this kind of false sense of like, oh, well, you have too much money, but you're asking for more. I mean, it's just this kind of false idea that Tabor has created by this kind of weird wording of saying, well, this one little thing went over here, you gotta give it back this way. And so I think this is a huge detriment to the community, to the city. Tabor is a huge detriment to the city by forcing us to this. I think it's good that, we can go to the voters and say, hey, we have this money, but the way this specific section is worded is just so, I think, disingenuous to what, it means to run an efficient government rather than to be punitive and kind of restrict government beyond what is reasonable. And so I hear your question with that and the concern that you had about that. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there that we have this this need for these funds right here, but it's hard to kind of rationalize putting them on there when we have a need for even greater funds.
I'd like to make a motion.
And just
Or
see
do
if
we have
anyone
to
else.
wait for public-
We have to wait for public comment. So
Okay.
I just want to see if anyone has any questions. All right. So no more questions. Let's open up the public comment period at 7:30. If anyone wishes to speak specifically to this ordinance, come up. You have 3 minutes to talk to council, share your thoughts. I see 2 tentative hands. Going out forever. All right, Pam, come first.
Good evening. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. And I also happen to live kitty corner to one of the original medical marijuana places. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not against marijuana businesses or anything like that. But I am very much for location restrictions. I don't want to give away the tax increase, but still give incentives to the businesses now. That, to me, does not tie together logically for the city at all. I think the city should restrict areas where marijuana can be sold. And that's in anticipation, it's a adjacent use issue of potential conflicts in parks, at schools, with marijuana being nearby. It's a reasonable thing to restrict the locations, and I don't want those loosened unless there is a reason for taxes. So you're talking about doing that, and I want to make sure, I'd like to let you know, I think those location restrictions should remain. I'm not sure why it comes up over and over again as part of this.
We're specifically to this tax increase here. We're not talking about changing anything tonight. There was a question on could things be done, but can you focus your comments on this question here?
Well, because it was part of the original question for this, and let me point out, I mean, for the public, that was uncertain until this night. That's not fair to the public. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. In the previous packages, it was like, well, we could also do this, 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 or this. I'm sorry, but we should know, and you should tell us, and staff should tell us, and it should be clear what your choices are. so that the public can be engaged. Look, this is the 5th Tuesday in the month. Most people don't know this is happening. And there are some pretty big issues here. And I am saying from the public point of view, this disadvantages the public. I hope that you as elected representatives can feel that at some level. It's your job to represent the public, but the public had no awareness of the trade-offs that might occur tonight or last week. These are special meetings. So they're not usual nights that council meets. So again, I don't want any other changes to occur if this is removed. I think the location restrictions are logical. And the whole issue about we need polling so that we can manipulate voters and we know what they want, to some extent, shouldn't the voters just be presented with the issues and we give information to them so they can decide logically? I hope part of this is clear. I would say more if I could. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Chaborn. Next up.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Frank Atwood. I live in District 4. And yes, Councilmember Driscoll, I do have owned a dog in the past. And some of you may be familiar with Parkinson's Law. It was written in the 1950s, and one of the comments he made is that government increases at 5 or 10% per year versus whatever the rest of the country is doing. You can watch government increase, and I think this is one of the reasons I'm quite supportive of Tabor, and I look forward to...
Mr. Atwood, we're talking about the marijuana tax increase, are you?
I know we are also talking about it earlier this evening.
We're talking about it right now, that's what
Okay.
this is for.
Coming back to this evening's sin tax discussion of this tax, I think, represents inflation and growth of community. It also, on this particular chart, I think columns that are missing. One, I'd like to first thank Kathleen for including the footnotes. Thank you very much for the footnotes. But in addition to that, the hours of operation, the safety considerations, the footprint, and more locations per population, I regret aren't on that chart. I think those are issues that have been brought up. With regards to the purpose on the next page of public safety, I'm curious where the increased foot and bike patrols will be other than downtown, and I would think the DDA would be funding their own police force or security center. And once again, with regards to outreach, I'm grateful that the industry is being talked to, but I would like the volunteers on the licensing authority to also be talked to. I think they're your window on marijuana and alcohol consumption here in Littleton. Look forward to your vote here, and once again, I encourage each of you to read Parkinson's Law. He's best known for...
Is that related to the tax increase that we're talking about right now?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because Parkinson says work increases to the time allotted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atwood. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? See no one, I'm going to close. Oh, we got one more here, okay.
Good evening. My name is Natalie Munton. I'm actually a resident of Lakewood, but the reason I'm here this evening is also because I am a board director with the Taxpayers Bill of Rights Foundation, the Tabor Foundation. This issue does...
Mayor, can we get...
Yeah, are you
control of this meeting?
speaking specifically to this marijuana tax increase?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
because there is a TABOR component to it. That is the language at the end where it says, to allow the city to keep the revenue without limitation, notwithstanding any of the limitations contained within Article 10, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution or any other law. The Taxpayers' Bill of Rights did not intend for government to be able to keep excess revenue forever. It actually speaks in TABOR to a 4-year limitation. If there's any doubt about that, the author of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights will willingly take a phone call. He is listed on a Google search or easily accessible by email. And he will clearly explain to you and any other government or elected body or citizen, there's meant to be a 4-year limit on government keeping excess revenue. It's meant to be a sunset to allow voters to review what the government has done with that money. 4 years coincides with a normal elected term. So I would suggest that this perhaps be tabled, which it may be already, as it sounds like, not wanting to crowd the ballot with 2 tax increases. But I would suggest that in a future discussion, and especially with the other tax increase that's going on the ballot likely, to keep in mind that these are not meant to be permanent in allowing government to keep revenue. And again, I come from a body that each and every day understands and works for the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. I heard earlier as I was driving here listening to this meeting, there are not experts in this room. I would suggest perhaps looking into that. Thank you very much. I'm glad to share this information with you tonight.
Thank you. Just for the record, there was only one tax increase that was presented to be on the ballot from Littleton. So City Manager, do you have a comment?
Thank you. Yes, with respect to the first comment, I understand the perception that the speaker was conveying, but I want to emphasize that this the discussion of the tax measure tonight was not certainly not contrived to be held on a fifth Tuesday. This had been advertised for first reading, passed, second reading at your last meeting, and it was very publicly continued. And I also will just point out that the integration or the way that a potential sales tax increase on marijuana could have integrated with the rest of a budget proposal had been outlined in some detail at a budget study session a few weeks ago, and will be, addressed in much more detail for the public. Is welcome to come to the council's all-day budget workshop on September 9th. So while this is focused only on that sales tax, the increase, the way that the tax revenue and these programs could interplay with other proactive public safety services has been outlined in public and will be talked about further in other public settings.
Thank you. Council, any questions?
No.
Seeing no questions?
I move to approve ordinance 16-2023.
Is there a second? I will second it. All right, there is a motion and a second to approve ordinance 16-2023 submitted to the register electors of the city of Littleton, Colorado, a ballot issue regarding a proposed additional increase of 3.5% tax on a retail sale of marijuana and marijuana products. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're suggesting putting both on the ballot?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. I think the taxpayers of Littleton are smart enough to read a couple sentences. One saying in the TABOR without imposing any new tax. So to me, they get that. The marijuana tax, we all agreed on the first reading. It was a 7-0 to vote, I believe. Again, a tax that doesn't affect a ton of people, but it certainly helps a lot of people if we can get that passed also. This concept of being a taxpayer being overwhelmed is just complete. I don't know where it comes from, but I don't think these are not difficult questions. So I suggest putting both these on the ballot, and let's get on with life.
Any other comments? Councilmember Barr.
So thank you, staff, for the consideration of these points tonight. And to kind of follow up on my previous comment or question, I should say, I wrestled with this. I'll be voting, I will not be voting to put the marijuana tax on the ballot. And the reason being truly is because I am putting my trust in staff's analysis of this. I think that we have a ton of competing priorities in our budget this year. And, not least among them is obviously, supporting our police department. I see this, I see not putting the marijuana tax on the ballot this year strategically in the sense that the downside risk of the failure of the Tabor measure being so great as to essentially cripple many other programmatic initiatives we have in our budget. And I think that was why I was alluding to how much I appreciated the fact that that the mental health and social worker support will find its way into our budget this year to make a small and meaningful step forward. But yes, that is at the expense of other things. And I think that is a worthwhile trade-off. But I'll be voting, I will not be voting in favor of this because the downside risk is actually, I feel, is just too great.
Councilmember Grove.
I agree with Councilmember Barr. One piece that we didn't talk about was the polling that we did. And it's not to poll to manipulate voters. Polling helps you to understand where people are coming from on a larger scale and understand what messages resonate with them. We have not done that. In the past, we've had many discussions about the lodger's tax and this marijuana tax, and we felt it should be the only tax on the ballot and not have another one. And I agree with staff in terms of we're putting too many projects in jeopardy, and if we can just inch forward with some of these changes to what we're recommending for the proactive safety measures and maybe not put as many police men on the street, but maybe put more mental health experts to alleviate that. That's what I'd like to see. And I had the same question about, well, if we can do it this year, can't we do it next year? Well, hopefully next year we will get into the more proactive police and then in addition be able to keep the mental health professionals. So I will not be supporting this either.
Councilmember Milliman.
I'm going to be agreeing with staff recommendation too, to not put this on the ballot in November, even in discussions tonight, even that we've heard somebody confused about thinking that we were asking for 2 tax increases. It's very easily done. I think we just need to keep it to this one issue and focus on the Tabor ballot, this potential or no refund. And I'm going to be voting no.
Any other comments?
I'll make one final comment. The citizens understand this stuff, and we have more outreach programs than we've ever had, from the Littleton Business Chamber to the Downtown Development Authority. It is so easy to get things passed in this city or not get them passed, depending on how certain organizations lean and how much pressure we put out there on the streets and how much information they have. So I think we're doing a disservice by not passing this, or at least getting it on the ballot. I have no doubt that the citizens would vote in favor of both of these without even blinking an eye.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you for all of your comments, council members, on this one. I'm also kind of wrestling with it. Councilmember Driscoll, I think I agree with you. Well, I do think that there are some conflicting messaging that can be kind of confusing. I think one of the things we've been hearing from our citizens is the need for a lot of mental health and crisis support. And we've been hearing it over and over again, and our council addressed that as a #1 priority, even ahead of housing, being the safety concerns. And I don't have confidence in our current structuring. It wasn't prepared for tonight, and I get it. It's last minute that this stuff is coming up, but I don't see any guarantees that we can build that into our budget for the next fiscal year, and there probably would be some trade-offs. And I think it's really important that we show, hey, we don't have necessarily the resources in our general fund to support what our citizens have said that they need to ensure their safety and to ensure the mental health support of the folks that we're encountering. So why I think, yeah, the Tabor piece could be a little bit intimidating to some people, and I really would like to see what that language looks like. And if recollection, as I remember, it's going to be like a big paragraph to explain that, which I'm not super a fan of. But the language that we have for the marijuana tax increase, I think, is really solid. And I think it's really reflective of what we've been talking about the last 8 months. And I kind of want to put my faith in the voters on that. So I will vote in support of it.
Anyone else? Seeing no one, I've got a few comments. Like Mayor Pro Tem, I'm torn on this because while my gut tells me that Councilmember Driscoll's correct, I mean, I do think that they would both pass. But I do, the comment that you made before about, this dichotomy of having one ballot saying, hey, we have too much money, we need to give it back, and then the other one saying, hey, we need more money to do something. And if they were roughly equal, I think it would make sense to me to put them back on, but I'm not willing to try to get $416,000 with the off chance that, some voters enough voters may look at it and say, well, I'll approve the small one, but I'll get rid of this big one here. And so I think it's the conservative thing to do is to say, hey, let's hold off, let's figure out, let's get the important one passed here. And so I will not be, as much as I want to put this on the ballot, and that's why the Tabor question that we'll discuss next week it gives me so much pain to have to pull this off because I thought this was such a good ordinance here and was using those funds for things that would really help the community, and we might have to reduce those services and hold off for quite some time to find more funding for that. So I will not be supporting this tonight. So if there's no other comments, I will open the voting on this. A vote of yes is to put the marijuana tax increase on the ballot. A vote no is to not put it on the ballot this year.
The vote is 2 in favor, with council members Barr, Grove, Schlachter, Valdez, and Milliman voting no. The motion fails.
And just to confirm with either the city attorney or city clerk, we don't need a motion to postpone indefinitely. This died, we don't need a motion and it will die altogether?
Correct, it's deemed dead.
Deemed dead. Dead, it is dead. All right, well, thank you, council, and seeing nothing else on the agenda, we are adjourned at 7:50.